Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Tales from the Ranger's Grove. As always, I am your teller of tales, Russ Johnson. Well, it's been a minute since I produced a new Night Terror story because we've been spending a lot of time working on the Tyrrendale Tales, which, quite frankly, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, and we've put out 3 so far, with the 4th in the works. But I wanted to have some fun and let my creative juices flow, so hopefully you'll enjoy this new addition to the Night Terrors family. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Please note, Night Terrors is for a mature audience only. Episodes may contain language, violent images, and extreme gore. Welcome back, dear listener. Don't be a creep and stay hiding in the shadows. Come inside where I can see you. Tonight's tale is about family ties, though in this case they're less ties and more like chains, rusty bloodstained chains that rattle all the way back to the grave. You've heard of inheritances, haven't you? Jewelry, land, big shiny cars. But what if all you got from dear old Mom and Dad was a curse nasty enough to chew its way through every generation? This one's about a man named Walter Briggs, his niece Katie, and the family fortune that just couldn't stop burning a hole in their pockets. I call it the lantern. The woods knew his footsteps. Walter Briggs moved through them like a shadow. His beard, once black, was now mostly silver, and the weathered lines in his face told of long winters, hard labor, and a solitude that had become second nature. His eyes, sharp and pale as riverstone, missed little even in the dark. The old oil lantern swayed from his left hand, its glass clouded with soot, while the leather pouch at his belt sagged heavy with the clinking sound of coins. His coat was wool, patched and mended a dozen times, the cuffs frayed, the collar pulled high against the cold. The air was sharp enough to bite, smelling of wet leaves and iron-rich earth. Moonlight poured in pale ribbons through the canopy, and the branches seemed to lean toward him, listening. The stone circle waited ahead, just as it had for every full moon of his life. It sat in a small clearing, ringed by oaks older than the county itself, their roots pushing up the earth like the knuckles of buried giants. At the center stood a weathered wooden post, the hook at its peak blackened with years of flame. Beneath it, resting in the cradle of those ancient stones, was the iron bowl. Next to it, Walter knelt. His joints creaked, and he placed his flashlight on the ground. The bowl was as old as the curse, beaten into shape by hands long gone to dust. Rust bloomed along its edge, but the faint spirals carved into its surface still caught the moonlight. He set the lantern gently beside him in the beam of light cast by his flashlight, untied the pouch, and drew out several coins. Their edges were worn smooth by generations of hands, and he knew each ridge by touch. They had passed from the bloody hands of the very first Briggs to his, and tonight they would burn for him. He let them fall into the iron bowl with a dull, waiting clink. The sound echoed faintly, swallowed by the woods. Walter drew the antler-handled knife from his coat. The blade caught the moonlight as he turned his palm upward. A quick, practiced slice opened his flesh, and warm blood welled fast, pattering onto the gold in the bowl. Red ran along the shallow carvings before pooling beneath the coins. He closed his bleeding hand over the bowl, bowed his head, and recited the words in a voice low enough for the trees alone. Gold for the greed that rotted our hands, blood for the blood we spilled on your lands. Flame, hold the hunger, flame, keep it bound, till no Briggs walks upon this ground. He lifted the lantern to the post's hook and struck a match. The flame caught, small at first, then steady. Walter stared into the lantern's flame for a brief moment, then tucked the bloodied knife back into its sheath and tied a strip of cloth tightly around his palm. The knot was firm, quick, the sort of binding a man could do in his sleep after years of repetition. He picked up the flashlight. Its cone of yellow light pushed back only a narrow tunnel of the dark, but it was enough. He cast one last glance at the lantern, unwavering on its wooden perch, its glass glowing warm against the cold winds, and turned his back to it. His boots sank into the damp loam, crunching leaves and snapping twigs as he started down the path. The forest swallowed him, branches knitting tightly overhead, the glow of the clearing fading until it was only a memory at his back. Behind him, the iron bowl began to stir. The blood shimmered wetly over the stacked coins, seeping into their grooves, the gold turning dark as if bruised from within. Then came a hiss, a sharp exhalation like steam meeting fire, and suddenly the contents ignited. A sheet of green-white flame erupted upwards, bright enough to cast twisted shadows on the trees across the clearing. The entire hoard of coins, every last one, splintered, cracked, and folded in on itself as if consumed by invisible teeth. The flames devoured them completely until nothing remained but a shallow layer of fine gray ash. Down the trail, Walter paused mid-step. From far behind, back in the clearing he had left, a faint wash of emerald light spilled through the trees, painting the trunks ahead of him in ghastly hues. A muffled crack followed, rolling through the stillness like a frozen branch snapping in winter frost. He turned his head slightly, catching the glow over his shoulder, and waited until it pulsed once more before fading. Only then did he let out a breath he had been holding. The ritual was answered. The valley was safe for another night. He adjusted the flashlight in his hand and kept walking, the weight of his family's curse heavy on his shoulders, but for now, satisfied. The sun was high enough now to warm the tin roof and bring the smell of pine sap down from the hills. Walter sat on the porch with a chipped mug of coffee, one boot propped up on the railing, watching the line of the ridge where the trees swallowed the trail of the lantern. Out there, in the quiet shade, it would still be burning. A low rumble broke the stillness. He set the mug down. An older car, paint dulled and speckled with road dust, rolled slow up the gravel track from the country road. It settled to a stop a few yards from his porch. The driver's door opened and a woman stepped out. A wind-blown chestnut hair and a loose braid, sun-touched face with storm-gray eyes. A travel bag hung from one shoulder. She took in the cabin and the hills beyond, and then looked to him. "Are you Walter Briggs?" she asked, formal but polite. He didn't rise. "Who's asking?" She came a few paces closer, boots grinding the gravel. "Do you have a sister named Sarah?" He paused. "Had," he said after a moment. "She's dead. Car accident years ago." She reached into her coat and drew out a worn photograph, holding it up so he could see. Sarah, smiling beneath the summer sky, one arm around a little girl, 4, maybe 5, standing at her side with a silly grin. "My name's Katie." She let the moment hang. "Katie Briggs." Walter's gaze lifted from the photograph to her face. The recognition came slow and heavy. In that breath, a lifetime of solitary purpose cracked open. The years he'd spent believing he was the last, the careful resolve to end the curse with himself, all of it collapsing under the weight of her name. "Sarah was my mother," Katie said softly. For a moment, he just stood there, the porch and the pines and the sky pressing in close, his thoughts a tide of shock and dread. Then he cleared his throat. "Long drive?" he asked, his voice steady but thinner than he meant it to be. "All night," she said. "Figured it was worth it." He pushed his feet to start moving and opened the screen door. "Well, you better come in," he said. Katie hesitated, then climbed the steps, her boots thudding on the boards as she followed him inside. The door shut behind them with a low thump, keeping the cold outside. Inside, the air was warm and smelled faintly of pine smoke and old coffee. The place was tidy but lived in, heavy wooden chairs worn smooth by decades, books stacked on every flat surface, a wood stove radiating steady heat. Walter gestured to the table. "Coffee?" "Oh, that'd be great," Katie said, dropping her bag by the chair. "Been running on gas station stuff since yesterday." As the kettle hissed, she looked around at the odd trinkets and heirlooms on the wall and the worn maps in their frames. "Mom said you had a big falling out a long time ago, before I was even born. She never told me what happened between you two." Walter kept his eyes on the counter. "Your mother wanted her life a certain way, different from life out here. I didn't really fit into it." Katie gave a small shrug. "Well, I'm glad I found you." She smiled faintly. "Sorry if I'm talking a lot. I do that when I get nervous." She drew a breath and went on. "I never knew my father either. Mom said he was a one-night stand, gone before she opened her eyes in the morning sun. So it's just been me for a long time. And honestly, the last few years have been rough. Odd jobs, friends' couches, little apartments, just trying to get by." Walter poured the coffee into 2 mismatched mugs, set one in front of her, and then sat down. He watched her wrap her hands around it, her fingers long and quick like Sarah's. The resemblance was there in the shape of her eyes, the curve of her jaw. His chest felt heavier with each passing second. He'd spent decades alone, content in the knowledge that when he was gone, the line and the curse would die with him. Now, here she was, alive and breathing across his table. His flesh and blood. He couldn't turn away from that. Katie hesitated, then met his gaze. "If you don't mind, maybe I could stay here for a while? Just until I get back on my feet, and, we could get to know each other." Walter studied her for a long moment, weighing everything she didn't know against everything she meant just by existing. She was a part of this now, and he needed to get his head around it. "All right," he said at last. "Let's see how it goes." A bit of the tension eased from her shoulders. "Thanks. And would it be okay if I call you Uncle Walter?" The word landed heavier than he expected, pulling something taut in his chest. For years, Uncle had just been a word, not a living title. Now it was real. He let it settle, then gave the smallest of smiles. "Yeah," he said quietly. "That'll be fine." Walter was up before her, already at the door with his jacket when Katie shuffled into the kitchen, still rubbing the sleep from her eyes. "I need to run into town for some groceries," he said, not looking at her. "You'll be all right here on your own?" Katie nodded, then hesitated. "Yeah, I'll be fine, Uncle Walter." The words slipped out before she could think better of them. Walter stopped, hand on the doorknob. Uncle. It echoed inside him, heavier than he expected. Family. Blood. He swallowed, gave the smallest of nods, and left without another word. The truck's rumble dwindled down the dirt road until silence reclaimed the cabin. Katie stood there a moment, then let her curiosity lead her. The cabin was like a time capsule. Old black-and-white photographs lined the walls, men with rigid postures, women with grim faces, none smiling. Their eyes followed her in that eerie way portraits did sometimes, as if they were still present and watching. On a shelf, she found relics scattered like forgotten offerings, clay pipes, glass bottles clouded with residue, a rusted pocket watch that no longer ticked. But one thing drew her in. A small figure, crudely carved from wood, its body wrapped with scraps of fur. Tiny fragments were bound into it, strands of what looked like human hair tied into knots, small teeth, dog perhaps, fixed into its mouth. Its form was squat, monstrous, with a face too distorted to be human. Katie turned it in her hands, unsettled. It wasn't like any toy or charm she'd ever seen. It felt wrong, the kind of wrong that lingered in your stomach. She set it back quickly, rubbing her palms against her jeans. She moved on, and that was when her eyes caught a small, ordinary frame on the mantel. Inside was a faded photograph, 2 children. Walter, perhaps 12, stiff and serious even then. Beside him, a girl of 10, Sarah. Katie's breath caught. Sarah at that age looked almost exactly like Katie in the photograph she carried in her wallet. Same curls, same slight smile. She traced the glass with her fingertip, and despite everything, she smiled. Family. Real family. Next to the photograph on the mantel was an old, battered, iron-framed lantern, blackened from long use, but polished in odd places where hands had gripped it too often. It wasn't lit, nor even fitted with oil. It looked ceremonial, not practical. She lingered on it for a moment, wondering why Walter would keep such an old, heavy thing when flashlights sat on the counter. But there was something about it that made her uneasy. It seemed to belong more to the woods outside than to the quiet of the cabin. In a drawer, she found some documents stamped with seals, property deeds, land transfers. The language was formal, legalistic, but the meaning bled through. The Briggs family gaining, others losing. She frowned, unease mounting, and closed the drawer. Her pulse quickened as she glanced out the window to make sure Walter wasn't pulling back into the driveway. The coast was clear, so she crept into his bedroom. It was sparse, orderly. She opened drawers, finding shirts folded neatly, a brass button, a bag of marbles. He led a simple life, it seemed. But then her foot tapped against something hollow sounding in the floor. She crouched and pressed it open. The board shifted. Her heart began pounding as she pried it up. Beneath was a small space, and inside it a small tin. She opened it and recoiled. Photographs. The same stern men from the portraits on the walls, but here they stood over bodies. Mutilated corpses sprawled in dirt, blood staining their clothes. Some hung from trees, necks broken, faces swollen. Others beheaded, limbs hacked apart. In every picture, her relatives stood with rifles, machetes, and axes in hand, expressions hard, unflinching, proud, like hunters with their trophies. Katie shut the tin fast, breathing hard, bile rising. And then she saw them. 2 leather sacks pushed deeper into the hollow. She pulled one free, hands trembling. The drawstring gave way, and a flood of gold spilled into her lap. Coins upon coins upon coins, hundreds of them, stamped with markings from ages past. They gleamed even in the dim light, heavy with promise. Katie froze, staring. Her heart raced as she picked one up, rolled it between her fingers. It was real, solid, worth more than she could dream. This could change everything. Rent, bills, her whole damn life. The irony was cruel. She didn't know that this treasure, the very thing she thought could change her life, was the only thing that kept her life from changing in the most terrible way imaginable. Her hand closed tight around one coin. Just one. He'd never notice. She slipped it into her pocket. The decision heavy but made. She tucked the sacks back in, lowered the board, smoothed the rug. The cabin was silent again, but the photographs on the wall seemed to watch her differently now, as though they knew. Nearly a month had passed as the evening was filled with the sounds of thunder as the pouring rain fell rhythmically on the cabin's roof. The smell of old wood and ashes clung to the air, and the lantern on the mantel sat like a silent witness, its glass dark, its handle tarnished from years of use. Walter sat at the table. He asked Katie if he could speak to her. She took a seat across from him, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her skirt, waiting for him to speak. When his eyes finally lifted to hers, there was no anger in them, only weariness. "I know, Katie," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of something long rehearsed. "I know you've been through my things. The photographs, the deeds, the gold." Her breath caught, and she looked down at her hands. "And," he continued slower now, "I know you took a coin." She opened her mouth, stammering, I wasn't." Walter raised a hand, silencing her with a small, almost fatherly gesture. "I'm not here to scold you. You're young and you're desperate. I understand. But you need to listen to me now, because that gold, it's not what you think it is." He leaned back, his chair creaking beneath him, and for a moment his gaze drifted to the carved figure sitting on the shelf. Its grotesque shape hunched, its wooden grin bound with scraps of hair and teeth. He reached for it, holding it with surprising reverence, and set it on the table between them. "You asked what kind of people your family were, Katie. Truth is, they weren't people at all. Not in the way most folks use the word anyway." He leaned back, voice slow, as if confessing before some unseen tribunal. "The Briggs carved their empire into this valley with the edge of a blade and the barrel of a rifle. They ruined neighbor after neighbor, seizing farms, water rights, livestock, anything they could twist into their own. They drive families to hunger, then swoop in with papers already drawn up, smiling like saviors while they stole the ground out from under their feet. And if anyone resisted..." He paused, his jaw tightening. "Well, you've seen the photographs. Guns and axes in their hands, bodies at their feet. They called it strength. They called it legacy." Katie thought of the pictures hidden in the tin beneath the floor, her stomach turning. "They destroyed lives, entire bloodlines," Walter continued. "Left the valley pockmarked with ghosts, and they never looked back. That was the Briggs way. No guilt, no hesitation. Just take and take and take until nothing was left but their own reflection staring back at them." He fell quiet for a moment, eyes shadowed. Walter sank into his chair, exhaling slowly, as if bracing himself against ghosts only he could see. His eyes drifted to the darkened mantel, to the battered lantern that waited there like a silent witness. Katie's chest tightened. She could still see the photographs she found, grim men and women standing over the broken bodies of others, rifles and machetes in hand, pride in their eyes.
"But there was one family," he said at last. "A family who came here from Haiti, freed from chains, proud and determined to build something of their own. They had land, they had livestock, and they had each other. For a time, they thrived."
Walter's gaze hardened, his words slower now, careful, as if each one carried weight.
"The Briggs couldn't abide that. They did what they always did. They schemed, they cheated, and when they failed, they killed. One by one, the Haitians fell. Men shot in the fields, women cut down in their homes, children silenced before they even had a chance to grow. And when it was over, my ancestors thought they'd won. More land, more gold, more power."
His gaze fell upon the carved figure.
"But they didn't know Elowen."
His voice was barely above a whisper now.
"She was the matriarch of that family, the last to stand. She lived long enough to watch her kin butchered around her, and in her final breath, she cursed us. Not with words you'll find in any prayer book, but with something old that she brought from Haiti. A religion of sorts. She said our greed would never be sated."
Katie's throat tightened. The figure's carved face leered at her from the table, its teeth catching the light. His hand tightened around the figure and his voice dropped to a reverent murmur. He leaned closer, his voice raw, steady.
"That's why I burn the gold, Katie. Every month under the full moon, I carry their stolen wealth to the mountain. Every corn they hoarded in blood and greed must be consumed piece by piece until nothing remains. If I fail, if even one offering is missed, then the graves will open, and every Briggs that ever lived will rise in this form."
He tapped the figure with one thick finger.
"Not men, not women, not beasts of this earth. Something worse. Hunger given flesh."
The fire snapped, and Katie flinched. Walter sat back heavily, his shoulders sagging.
"They're all gone now. I thought I was the last. But you're here now. Which means this doesn't end with me."
His voice faltered, then steadied again.
"I'm so sorry, Katie. But one day, this will be yours. This burden, this responsibility, this curse."
Katie couldn't answer, her gaze fixed on the figure, its stitched mouth grinning back at her as though Elowen herself was still whispering from the grave. The next day dragged like lead. Walter moved about the cabin with quiet purpose, setting aside a small leather pouch of coins, sharpening the knife he used for the ritual, folding the same cloth he always carried in his pocket. Katie watched him from the corner of her eye, her stomach knotting tighter with every small, practiced gesture. She couldn't shake his words from the night before. The curse, the hunger, Elowen. The grotesque little figure carved from wood and bound with scraps of hair and fur. It all swirled in her head like smoke she couldn't breathe away. But the longer she turned it over, the less real it felt. Ancient curses? Monsters in the skin of her ancestors? No. She clenched her fists, anger prickling at her ribs. That wasn't life. It was madness. Now she understood why her mother had run. Who would want to live beneath that shadow, forced to sacrifice wealth to ashes every month just to keep some half-whispered horror at bay? Who would want to inherit that? No one sane. Certainly not her. And Walter. Stoic, strange Walter. What else could he be but insane? He'd spent his life convincing himself that burning away gold was noble, necessary. But Katie saw it for what it was. Waste. Madness. Shackles disguised as duty. She wasn't going to be chained like this. Not like him. Not like Sarah might have been if she'd stayed. No. Katie would take control of her life in the only way left to her. Her eyes drifted to the room where she knew the sacks of gold lay hidden under those loose floorboards. The sight of them had haunted her every night since she first discovered them. More wealth than she had ever imagined, just sitting there, waiting. Walter would leave tonight, trudging into the woods with his pouch of coins. He'd go up on the mountain, carrying out his ritual, muttering his verses to the moon like some sort of madman. And while he did, she'd move quickly. She'd slip into his room, haul out the sacks of gold, and drag them to her car. Her trunk was empty and waiting. It would take some effort, but adrenaline and desperation would lend her strength. Then she'd follow him into the woods. She'd stay back, hidden in the trees. She'd watch. See what he really did with the coins. He couldn't possibly be burning them all. There had to be some trick, some hoard, some cache where the rest went. He wasn't insane. Not completely. There had to be an explanation. And when he was on his way back, she'd move in, grab whatever he left behind, and vanish into the night. With the sacks in her car and whatever else she could snatch from him, she'd have everything she needed. It was too easy. Evening sank heavy over the valley, the woods holding their breath beneath the rising moon. Walter stood in the doorway, lantern unlit in his hand, the leather pouch of coins heavy at his belt. He paused just long enough to meet Katie's eyes. "I'll be back," he said quietly. His voice carried the same ritual weariness it always did on these nights. Katie nodded, heart pounding. "I'll be fine," she said. Then, after the smallest hesitation, added softly, "Uncle Walter." His jaw tightened. For just a flicker, something deep and unreadable crossed his eyes. He gave a curt nod and stepped into the dark, the crunch of boots on gravel fading down the path. Katie waited, counting each heartbeat until his flashlight bobbed out of sight. Then she moved, fast. She pried up the loose floorboards with fingers that trembled less from fear than from urgency. The sacks of gold were heavier than she imagined, their seams groaning under the weight as she dragged them free. Sweat rolled down her spine as she hauled the bags, one by one, out to her car. Her arms screamed, but her resolve screamed louder. Freedom. Escape. A new life. By the time she slammed the trunk shut, her chest burned with exhaustion. But the gold was hers now. She grabbed a flashlight, shoved it into her pocket, and hurried into the woods. She knew the path. She'd studied the way he walked it, and soon enough the faint, steady glow of Walter's light appeared ahead. He wasn't hurrying. He never did. She stayed back, ducking behind trees, keeping to the edges of shadow, the thrill of the chase pounding in her ears. At last, the clearing opened before her. Walter moved with grim reverence, laying the coins into the bowl, slicing his palm with the ease of long practice, blood pattering onto the gleaming gold. He spoke the words, the ritual handed down like a curse itself. Katie's stomach churned, but she forced herself to wait. Timing was everything. He finished, bound his hand with the waiting cloth, and turned back down the path, leaving the lantern and the bowl behind. She crouched in the dark until his light dwindled and vanished between the trees. Then she crept forward, breath shallow. The coins lay before her, sticky with blood, faintly metallic in the moonlight. One by one she snatched them up and started shoving them into her pockets, her smile growing despite herself. This was it, her chance, her life. Katy wiped her hands on her jeans, laughing under her breath. Walter would return to an empty bowl, none the wiser. By the time he reached the cabin, she'd be long gone. Behind her, the lantern gave a weak flicker, as though straining toward its purpose. A tongue of green fire licked the glass, then sputtered and died, leaving the clearing darker than before. Far down the trail, Walter walked with purpose, all the while waiting and listening for the sound, the flare of light, the crack of ash, the sign the ritual was complete. But nothing came. He slowed, unease crawling up his spine. By now it should have happened. The silence pressed too heavy. The woods felt wrong. He turned, quickened his pace, then broke into a run, his flashlight jerking wildly as branches tore at his coat. Then the lantern flared. A sudden, violet burst of emerald light filled the clearing, so bright it burned her eyes. She froze, shielding her face, heart hammering. And then, just as quick, the flame guttered out, pulling her back into shadow. Her head snapped toward it, wide-eyed. That wasn't supposed to happen. Walter burst into the clearing. His flashlight beam froze her in its circle, locking her in place like prey. His face contorted with shock and terror. "Katy, what have you done?" His voice cracked, half begging, half accusing. She straightened, coins slipping between her fingers. "I'm putting an end to this madness, Walter. I'll use the gold to make a life, something you never did. You should thank me, Walter. You're free now. No more rituals, no more madness." He stumbled forward, eyes wide, grief swallowing his features. "No, Katy, you don't understand. It isn't madness. It's the only thing that holds them back." His voice shook. "There's still time. Give me the coins, now!" He lunged, seizing her wrists, his old strength fueled by terror. Katy's breath came ragged as she and Walter strained against each other, the coins biting into her palms. He was stronger, but desperation lent her strength. Then the lantern roared to life, flooding the clearing with its emerald blaze. They froze, bathed in sickly green light. The air thickened, heavy as the forest itself held its breath. From beyond the circle of trees came the scrape of claw on earth, the whisper of something vast and unseen moving closer. Figures staggered out of the tree line, grotesque parodies of men, their bodies twisted, bones thrusting at odd angles beneath gray flesh. Arms too long, fingers curved into claws that scraped the earth. Their mouths yawned wide, split back almost to the ears, packed with jagged inward slanting teeth. Red eyes glowed from hollow sockets and fixed on Katy and Walter. And then she was there. Elowen. An old woman in rags from another century, her spine bent but her presence towering. Her eyes glowed faintly red as they fastened on Walter and Katy. Her lips peeled back in a smile. "Briggs!" she rasped, the name venomous, old as rot. She spat. The blood hit the earth with a hiss, black and smoking in the lantern light. Then she laughed, low and terrible, before fading into the dark like smoke carried by the wind. Walter convulsed, his body bent double, a howl ripping through his throat. His chest heaved, bones snapping beneath his skin. His jaw lurched sideways, splitting, teeth forcing themselves out in new crooked rows. Flesh tore across his cheek as his mouth widened too far, drool and blood running down his chin. His fingers curled into claws, nails tearing themselves bloody as they elongated. His skin rippled, patches splitting into raw, mottled hide. His back snapped as his frame twisted, spine jutting like broken glass beneath flesh. Walter fell to his knees, choking on a howl that no longer sounded human. His eyes, once gray and kind, burned with the same red fire as the monsters circling the clearing. "Uncle Walter," Katie whispered, tears blurring her vision. The coins spilled from her grasp, falling one by one into the dirt, clinking like funeral bells. Then the fire ignited in her veins. It struck like lightning, a searing pain ripping through her chest, spreading to her limbs. She dropped to her knees with a scream, her body convulsing as the coins scattered across the ground. Her skin burned and blistered, then darkened in jagged veins like cracks through porcelain. She clawed at herself, feeling her spine twist, her teeth ache with unnatural pressure. The sound of bone splitting inside her own body nearly drowned her sobs. Her jaw stretched wide, too wide, a shriek spilling out that curled into something guttural. Katie's flashlight rolled uselessly aside, its beam catching her twisted reflection in Walter's wild, bloodshot eyes.
Well, well, I suppose Katie finally got what she wanted. All her life she longed for family, something to belong to, something that couldn't leave her behind, and she got it all right. Blood, bone, and hunger knotted together tighter than any family reunion. Ah, families. They'll pass down their recipes, their stories, and sometimes a centuries-old curse that turns you into a flesh-hungry nightmare. Who says tradition is dead? Sweet nightmares.